Josh Hamilton's office sat on the top floor like a sealed observation deck. Glass walls, pale steel, and a skyline that looked more like a balance sheet than a view. Every surface was sharp, reflective, and meticulously arranged. Even the muted city below felt curated, as if chaos itself had been edited out before it reached this height. Inside that box of order, Josh moved with the same unbending precision. Dark suit, controlled posture, and a mind that turned every conversation into a calculation. Ethelred Capital ran on his obsession with predictability, and people whispered that the building didn't just belong to him, it obeyed him. Upper management at Ethelred had long since learned the shape of his unwritten commandments, a culture-wide script no one dared acknowledge out loud. Meetings started on the second, not the minute. Small talk died at the door. Color belonged in charts, not clothing, and any hire who might drag attention away from numbers simply never made it past HR. The most vicious line in that invisible policy was also the one no one could afford to name. Women whose bodies, distracted from the work, were screened out before their resumes reached his desk. To Josh, curves meant softness, softness meant weakness, and weakness was the first crack before empires fell. At 2:58 on a rain-streaked Tuesday, his assistant slid a single folder onto his glass desk. The candidate every partner had pushed for, the one whose results were too spectacular to ignore. Executive Director of Strategic Finance, 3 global turnarounds, a reputation for walking into failing firms and tripling their value before anyone realized she'd moved the pieces. Her name was Rosalina Wells. The file said she was due at 3. The photograph was conspicuously absent, a gap that irritated Josh more than he cared to admit, because gaps meant variables, and variables meant risk. The door to his office clicked once, soft but decisive, and swung inward. She stepped onto the threshold as if the glass and steel fortress had been built for her entrance. Rich, dark curls framing her face, a fitted lavender dress that honored every curve instead of hiding it, and a gaze that told him she was used to walking into rooms where she was not wanted and leaving with the room in her pocket. In that instant, Josh recognized 2 things with surgical clarity. First, that Rosalina Wells was exactly the kind of mind Ethelred Capital needed to survive its next expansion. Sharp, fearless, unapologetically strategic. Second, that her very existence on this floor meant someone had bypassed his most sacred rule, and that if he didn't send her away immediately, the law that held his entire world together was about to break from the inside. But before we dive deeper into this story, please kindly take a moment to comment below with the city you are watching this video from. Hit the like button, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel to help me to reach my first 1,000 subscribers if you haven't done that already. Josh rose as the door opened, more on reflex than courtesy. The woman who stepped inside did not belong to the grayscale script of his day. Lavender. The color hit first. The dress traced every deliberate curve of her body, structured yet unapologetically feminine, as if tailored to offend his rules and outclass them in the same breath. Curls framed her face in a dark, controlled halo, and her heels clicked once on the polished floor before she stopped, perfectly centered in his office, as though she had measured the space and claimed the axis. "Mr. Hamilton." Her voice held no question, only confirmation. She didn't fidget, didn't smooth her dress, didn't blink at the view that made seasoned executives swallow. Her gaze traveled over his desk, his screens, his single precisely stacked file. She took in his world the way a strategist sizes up a chessboard. He told himself the quick spike in his pulse was irritation. "Miss Wells, please, sit." She crossed the room with an easy, predatory grace, each step a small rebellion against the invisible code everyone else obeyed. When she sat, the lavender skirt drew clean lines over powerful legs, and he hated that he'd noticed the shape instead of the resume. He'd dragged his focus to the folder, to numbers he'd already memorized. "You've reviewed the quarterly projections," he said. "I reviewed your entire model." Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "Your bleeding potential in 3 markets because your risk parameters were designed for stability, not dominance. I can double your growth in 18 months without increasing your exposure if you let go of 2 sacred habits." The word sacred landed like a slap. She outlined her plan in crisp, lethal strokes, restructuring product tiers, courting volatile but data-backed sectors, weaponizing his reputation for precision instead of hiding behind it. Her confidence pressed against him harder than the dress pressed against her body. "This role is visible," he said finally, hearing the roughness in his own voice. 3-month trial, Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives. You report only to me." His brain screamed, "No." His mouth had already said yes. Rosalina dismantled his assumptions in 72 hours. On her 3rd day, she walked into his morning briefing with a tablet and a smile that felt like a warning. The senior analyst straightened as she swept past, lavender replaced by emerald today, her heels announcing her arrival 3 seconds before she reached his desk. "Your algorithmic pricing model," she said, without preamble, turning the screen toward him. "Elegant, ruthless, and hemorrhaging $11 million annually because it can't account for micro-seasonal demand shifts in the Asian market." Josh's jaw tightened. He'd built that model himself 2 years ago. It was the backbone of their forecasting advantage. Impossible. She pulled up 3 data sets, her fingers moving across the glass with surgical confidence. The flaw revealed itself in tight, irrefutable columns, a timing gap so subtle it had hidden inside his own precision. She'd found the crack in his fortress. "I've already drafted the correction," she said, setting the tablet down. "Implementation can begin Monday if you approve it." He should have been furious. Instead, he felt something closer to awe, sharp and unwelcome. "Do it." She left the room trailing a scent he couldn't name, something warm, faintly floral, utterly at odds with the steel and glass sterility he required. It clung to the air after she was gone. By Friday, the whispers had started. Cassian, his second in command, cornered him near the executive elevators, voice low and edged with concern. "The board's talking. You've never hired someone like her." "Someone competent? Someone who looks like that?" Cassian's eyes flicked toward the strategy floor, where Rosalina's laughter, rich, unguarded, entirely too human, drifted through the glass partitions. "It's a risk to your brand, Josh, to the culture you've built." Josh turned back to the skyline, jaw locked. The culture he'd built, the rules that kept chaos at bay, and Rosalina Wells, walking through them like they were made of smoke. Josh coped the only way he knew how, by pretending she was a variable he could outwork. He lengthened his days, stacking meetings until the calendar bled, locking himself behind spreadsheets and projections that had always obeyed him. Yet, wherever he turned, Rosalina's fingerprints were already there. Notes in the margins, recalibrated assumptions, projections that dared to be bolder than his comfort allowed. At 10:43 on a Thursday night, the office had thinned to cleaning crews and distant elevator chimes. Josh stood over the conference table, sleeves rolled, tie abandoned, when Rosalina strode in carrying 2 coffees and a folder thick with color-coded tabs. "You're still clinging to conservative entry," she said, dropping the folder in front of him. "You'll win, but you'll win small. That's not why people fear you, Josh." He bristled. "Dominance is built on reliability, not theatrics." She moved closer, tapping a chart. "Dominance is built on knowing when to leap. This market won't wait for your comfort. Play it safe, and a competitor with half your resources will own the narrative." Their voices rose, sharp against the hush of the empty floor. He accused her of recklessness. She accused him of cowardice dressed as discipline. Somewhere between "you don't understand what's at stake" and "you're using fear as a business model," they were suddenly inches apart at the head of the table. The air changed, her perfume warm, lingering, wrapped around his self-control. He felt the heat of her body, the defiant tilt of her chin, the faint hitch in her breath that mirrored his own. For one suspended second, numbers vanished. There was only her mouth, far too close, and the raw, terrifying urge to close the distance. The door clicked. Cassian froze on the threshold, eyes narrowing as he took in the tableau. Rosalina stepped back first, mask sliding into place with professional ease. Later, in Josh's office, Cassian's verdict was quiet and lethal. "She's brilliant, but she's too much risk for the brand. For you." The night after their argument, Josh stood alone in his darkened office, city lights smeared across the glass like a graph he couldn't quite read. Rosalina's words from the conference room still burned beneath his skin, but it was the look in her eyes, the certainty that he was afraid, that wouldn't let him breathe. He closed his eyes, and the skyline blurred into another night, another woman. Elena had loved clean lines, her wardrobe, her presentations, even the ring she'd chosen. Thin band, flawless diamond, nothing extraneous. They'd built Ethelred's first iteration together at a borrowed kitchen table, her ink-straight handwriting marching across legal pads while he translated ideas into numbers. She had been sharp angles and restrained elegance, the embodiment of control. He'd told himself that was why he trusted her. The betrayal, when it came, was equally precise. A hidden account, a competing fund launched overnight with their proprietary model. The board's pitying glances as they informed him his fiancée had executed a perfect exit, taking clients, capital, and their shared future in one surgical cut. No raised voices, no messy scenes, just signatures and silence. In the aftermath, he'd rewritten everything. No distractions, no softness. He convinced himself that curves meant chaos, that anything too vivid or emotional would eventually demand more than he was willing to give. The rule had grown quietly, like scar tissue, until it shaped his entire world. A reflection moved in the glass behind him. Rosalina, jacket over one arm, paused in the doorway. "You look like you're fighting ghosts," she said softly. "Just thinking," he replied too quickly. She studied him, gaze cutting through the polished veneer. "I've seen men build empires out of fear, Josh. They always call it standards." She stepped closer, voice low but unflinching. "Your rules are built to protect weakness, not project power." The Helix acquisition was collapsing. 2 weeks of negotiations crumbled in a single leaked memo, wiping $12 million from the deal and sending their lead investor toward the door. Josh stared at the conference call screen, watching his carefully engineered takeover fracture in real time. Rosalina burst into the room mid-call, tablet already glowing. "Mute them," she ordered. He did, too exhausted to argue. She outlined her plan in 90 seconds flat, a radical restructuring that flipped their liability into leverage by turning the leaked memo into proof of transparency. It was audacious, borderline reckless, and required Josh to endorse her publicly on a recorded investor call, betting his reputation on her instinct instead of his data. "Do you trust me?" she asked. His world narrowed to her eyes, fierce and unblinking. "Yes." They worked through the night, side by side, voices overlapping as they rebuilt the pitch from the ground up. Somewhere past 3 a.m., their hands brushed over the same document. Neither pulled away. When the final call ended at dawn with signatures secured, the silence roared louder than celebration. Rosalina turned to him, triumph lighting her face, and Josh felt the last wall crack. He reached for her, fingers grazing her jaw, and she leaned in close enough that he could feel her breath against his mouth. Then she stopped, pulled back. Her expression shifted from want to something colder, sharper. "This doesn't change anything for you, does it?" she whispered. "I'll still be the exception you hide, the guilty thrill you can't explain to Cassian or the board." "Rosalina, I can't be your secret or your charity case, Josh." She stepped away, collecting her things with trembling hands. "When you're ready to shatter your rules instead of bending them in private, you know where to find me." The note on his desk the next morning was 6 words. "I can't be your guilt project." The office felt like a mausoleum. Josh moved through meetings on autopilot, watching analysts deliver reports in muted tones that lacked the spark of challenge. No one questioned his models anymore. No one wore color. The hum of controlled efficiency he'd once prized now felt suffocating, like breathing recycled air in a sealed room. Cassian noticed first. "The momentum's gone," he said carefully during a quarterly review. "Since Wells left." Josh said nothing. At night, alone in his glass tower, he replayed her final words until they carved grooves in his mind. "I can't be your guilt project." She'd been right. He'd wanted her brilliance, her fire, her body, but only in the shadows. Never as an equal disruption to the system he'd sworn to protect. He missed the arguments, the lavender dresses, the perfume that made spreadsheets feel like lies. He missed her, and the realization arrived with the force of a verdict. Control without her wasn't victory. It was just emptiness dressed in a tailored suit. On a Friday evening, scrolling industry news out of habit more than interest, he saw the announcement. Global Finance Summit. Keynote speaker, Rosalina Wells. Topic, shattering the boardroom aesthetic, why your best hires are the ones you fear. The session was in 2 days. Chicago. He cleared his calendar without explanation. The auditorium held 800 people when he slipped into the back row. Then the lights dimmed, and she walked on stage in a dress the color of fire, commanding the space as if she'd built it herself. Her voice filled the room, confident, unapologetic, devastating. "We build empires on fear," she told the silent crowd. "We call it standards, tradition, brand. But the moment you design your company to exclude the very people who make you uncomfortable, you've stopped leading. You've started hiding." Josh's chest tightened. Every word was a scalpel, and she wielded it like she knew exactly where he sat. Josh waited by the stage exit as the crowd dispersed, ignoring the stares from executives who recognized him. When Rosalina emerged, her eyes widened briefly before her mask descended. "Josh, that speech was about me. It was about 1,000 men like you." She moved past him toward the hotel corridor, heels clicking a steady retreat. He followed. "I was wrong," he said to her back. "About everything?" She stopped, turned. "Wrong enough to do something about it, or just wrong enough to apologize in private?" "What do you want from me?" Her laugh was sharp, humorless. Not a VP title, not a raise or a corner office consolation prize. She stepped closer, eyes blazing. "I want proof that you can break the rule that's defined your entire empire, not bend it for me in secret. Shatter it, publicly, permanently, because anything less means I'm still just the exception you're ashamed to defend. The challenge hung between them like a contract. Josh felt the vertigo of the choice, his reputation, his carefully constructed culture, the unspoken law that had protected him since Elena's betrayal. Then he looked at Rosalina, fierce and uncompromising, and realized the only thing he feared more than losing control was losing her. "Be at Ethelred tomorrow, 10 a.m. 20 hours later, the boardroom filled with confused executives summoned on emergency notice. Josh stood at the head of the table, Rosalina seated deliberately at his right, visible, undeniable. "I'm restructuring leadership," he announced. "Effective immediately, I'm creating the role of President of Strategy, co-equal to CEO. This person will report to no one but this board and will have full authority over growth, acquisition, and innovation." Cassian's face went pale. "Josh, we haven't vetted. I'm appointing Rosalina Wells. Vote now." Silence, then murmurs, then, impossibly, hands rising. The rule he'd built his world on shattered in a single unanimous vote. The board filed out, murmuring congratulations that felt hollow. Rosalina remained seated, hands folded, expression unreadable. When they were alone, she finally spoke. "I need the truth, Josh, not the public gesture. Why that rule? Why me?" He exhaled slowly. "Not here." He drove them north in silence, away from glass towers and manicured skylines, until the city dissolved into quiet roads lined with trees that hadn't been designed by architects. The cabin belonged to a colleague who owed him favors, small, wooden, anonymous. Inside, with only firelight between them, Josh's carefully constructed walls had nowhere left to hide. "Her name was Elena," he began, voice rough. "My fiancée, my business partner. She was everything I thought I wanted. Controlled, elegant, predictable. Perfect lines, perfect discipline. I trusted her because she fit the system I believed in." Rosalina listened without interruption as he detailed the betrayal. The hollow precision of Elena's exit, the way she'd dismantled him using the very control he'd worshipped. "After that, I rewrote everything. I convinced myself that anything soft, anything unpredictable, anything that made me feel instead of calculate was a threat. Curves, color, passion. I coded it all as weakness." His hands clenched. "I built an empire on fear and called it standards." He met her eyes. "Then you walked in wearing lavender like a declaration of war. And you didn't just challenge my rules, Rosalina. You made me realize my entire life was a gilded cage, and you're the only key I've ever wanted." Silence stretched, broken only by the fire's crackle. Then Rosalina rose, closed the distance between them, and took his face in her hands. "I don't want the job if it's separate from you," she said quietly. "I want the partnership, the honesty, the risk." "You have it," he whispered, "all of it." Her kiss tasted like freedom. Ethelred Capital transformed under their joint command. Rosalina's bold market strategies balanced Josh's precision, creating a firm that moved with controlled aggression instead of fearful restraint. The glass fortress remained, but now color bloomed through the hallways. Vibrant presentations, diverse leadership, laughter that didn't apologize for existing. Revenue doubled in 9 months. The culture shifted from obedience to innovation. Their personal life unfolded with the same deliberate passion. Josh's sterile penthouse gained throw pillows in jewel tones, art that provoked instead of coordinated, and a kitchen that smelled of Rosalina's experiments with recipes she'd never follow precisely. They argued over market forecasts and made love on tables covered in spreadsheets, two forces that had learned to collide without destruction. On a rain-streaked Tuesday, exactly 1 year after her interview, Josh cleared his afternoon calendar without explanation. Rosalina found him waiting in his office at 3 o'clock, the city blurred behind him like an unfinished painting. "You're sentimental," she teased, but her voice caught when she saw his face. He pulled a small box from his jacket. The ring inside was anything but minimal, a vivid sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught light and threw it back in defiant color, asymmetrical and utterly unique. "I spent my entire life pursuing perfection," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Building systems to protect myself from feeling anything that couldn't be controlled or predicted. Then you walked through that door and made me realize perfection was just another word for empty." He took her hand. "I don't need perfect anymore, Rosalina. I need you." She kissed him before answering, tasting salt and triumph. "Yes." Their wedding 6 months later was nothing like the austere ceremony he'd once planned with Elena. It overflowed with color, music, and people who loved messily and loudly. Standing beside Rosalina beneath garlands of wildflowers, Josh finally understood the only empire worth building was one constructed on honest love, not fear.